It began with a private conversation no one was supposed to hear. Behind the heavy doors of a royal residence, King Charles III quietly revealed a final wish that left even the monarchy's most composed figures struggling to contain their emotions. What followed would send shockwaves through the House of Windsor and force Prince William and Princess Anne to confront a future they had desperately hoped was still years away. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For years, the British royal family had mastered the art of silence. Public appearances continued. Ceremonies were conducted with precision. Smiles were offered when required, and reassurances were delivered whenever speculation began to spread. Yet behind closed doors, there were moments that never reached the cameras, moments so deeply personal that even the most experienced palace aides understood they were witnessing history unfold. A core ding to reports circulating among royal insiders. One such moment occurred during a confidential family gathering requested personally by King Charles. The invitation itself immediately raised concerns. This was not a routine briefing. It was not connected to a state visit, a constitutional matter, or preparations for a major royal event. Instead, the request was unusually private, with attendance limited to only a select group of trusted individuals. Prince William was among the first to arrive. Princess Anne followed shortly afterward. Several long-serving advisors, figures who had spent decades protecting the institution from crisis and controversy, were also quietly summoned. What struck many observers later was not simply who attended the meeting, but the atmosphere surrounding it. There was an unusual sense of urgency. Conversations reportedly remained brief. Staff members were instructed to maintain absolute discretion. Even within palace circles, details were tightly controlled. That alone was enough to spark concern. When King Charles entered the room, however, those concerns reportedly deepened. For much of his life, Charles had been defined by patience. He had waited longer than any heir in British history to ascend the throne. He had weathered public scrutiny, personal challenges, and institutional pressures that would have overwhelmed many others. Yet those present allegedly noticed something different about him that day. There was a reflective quality in his demeanor, a heaviness that seemed impossible to ignore. Rather than discussing schedules, engagements, or governmental matters, his attention appeared focused on something far more profound. As the conversation unfolded, it became increasingly clear that this was not a meeting about duty. It was about legacy. Not the legacy recorded in official documents or preserved through portraits and ceremonies, but the deeply personal legacy that exists within a family. Charles reportedly spoke about the past, age of time. He reflected on the responsibilities that had shaped his life and the burdens that came with wearing the crown. But more than anything, he appeared concerned about what would remain after he was gone. Those familiar with royal traditions understood immediately that such discussions carried enormous emotional weight. The monarchy has always been built upon continuity, yet continuity becomes far more complicated when faced with the reality of mortality. Prince William, according to several accounts, listened carefully as his father spoke. For years, William had prepared for the future role that awaited him. He understood the demands of kingship, perhaps better than anyone else alive. Yet this conversation was different. This was not a king addressing his heir. This was a father speaking to his son. Reports suggest that as Charles continued, William struggled to maintain the composure for which he is known. The gravity of the moment began to settle over the room, creating a silence, lens that seemed almost impossible to break. Princess Anne, meanwhile, reportedly faced her own emotional battle. Throughout her life, Anne has been regarded as one of the strongest members of the royal family. Duty has always come before personal comfort. She has navigated crises, controversies, and immense public pressure with remarkable resilience. Yet even she appeared affected by what she was hearing. Those present later described an atmosphere unlike anything they had witnessed before. The usual barriers of protocol seemed to fade. Titles became secondary. Roles and responsibilities temporarily disappeared. What remained was a family confronting a deeply personal reality together. Outside those walls, life continued as normal. Public engagements proceeded. Headlines focused on other stories. Yet inside the royal household, there was a growing sense that something significant had just occurred. Palace insiders reportedly sensed that this meeting would eventually be remembered as a defining moment, not because of any constitutional decision or political consequence, but because of the emotional truth at its center. Something important had been shared. something that would linger in the hearts of those who heard it long after the conversation ended. But Charles's request was not about titles, palaces, or succession. It was about something far more personal. For decades, King Charles carried the burden of preparing for a role he waited a lifetime to inherit. Yet as the realities of age and illness became impossible to ignore, his thoughts reportedly turned away from the throne itself and toward the family he would eventually leave behind. The silence that followed the king's opening remarks felt heavier than anything that had been said before. Those gathered in that private meeting had expected a discussion about the institution, perhaps even the challenges facing the monarchy in the years ahead. Instead, they found themselves listening to a man who appeared determined. Mind to speak not as a sovereign, but as someone reflecting on the extraordinary path that had brought him to this moment. For decades, Charles had lived under a level of scrutiny few people could ever comprehend. Every decision, every setback, every triumph had unfolded beneath the gaze of the public. Yet according to reports from those familiar with the atmosphere surrounding the gathering, the king's attention seemed fixed on something much deeper than public perception. His thoughts had turned inward, toward the legacy he would leave behind. Throughout his life, Charles had often been portrayed as a figure waiting for history to arrive. He spent years preparing for responsibilities that seemed forever beyond reach. Then, when the crown finally became his, the reality of the role proved even more demanding than many had imagined. The expectations were immense, the pressures were relentless. The weight of continuing an institution that had endured for centuries rested squarely on his shoulders. Yet as he reflected during that private discussion, reports suggest that he was less concerned with what he had achieved, and more concerned with what might happen after him. That realization reportedly changed the entire mood of the room. The conversation gradually moved away from official duties and toward questions that carried far greater emotional significance. What would become of the family itself? What would happen to the bonds that had once seemed unbreakable? And perhaps most importantly, could the next generation avoid the divisions that had caused so much pain in recent years? These were not questions that could be answered through constitutional procedures or royal protocols. They were deeply personal concerns, rooted in relationships rather than titles. Sources familiar with royal circles suggest that ongoing health concerns may have influenced the king's perspective. Whether discussed directly or simply understood by those present, there appeared to be an awareness that time itself had become an increasingly precious commodity. That awareness gave every word additional weight. Suddenly, discussions about the future were no longer abstract considerations. They became urgent reflections on what truly mattered. And according to various interpretations of the meeting, Charles repeatedly returned to one central theme: unity. Not power, not status, not prestige, unity. For years, the monarchy had endured periods of turbulence. Public disagreements, private tensions, and lingering wounds had all contributed to an atmosphere of uncertainty. Charles reportedly acknowledged this reality without dwelling on individual grievances. Instead, he focused on the broader picture. The institution, he believed, could survive controversy. It could survive criticism. It could even survive crisis. But lasting division within the family itself posed a far greater threat. The stability of the monarchy had always depended on continuity, and continuity required things stronger than tradition alone. It required trust. As the discussion deepened, attention reportedly shifted toward Prince William. The future king had spent much of his adult life preparing to lead. He understood duty, he understood sacrifice. But Charles's message appeared to go beyond those familiar responsibilities. Reports suggest he urged William to become more than a guardian of the crown. He wanted him to become a guardian of family cohesion. The distinction was subtle, yet profound. Protecting an institution was one challenge. Protecting relationships damaged by years of strain was something entirely different. William reportedly listened carefully, fully aware of the significance behind his father's words. Those present sensed the emotional conflict unfolding beneath his composed exterior. On one side stood duty, the principle that had guided generations of monarchs. On the other stood the complicated realities of family, where emotions often refused to obey the rules of route. It was a burden unlike any he had faced before, and everyone in the room seemed to understand it. Princess Anne faced a responsibility of her own. If William represented the future, Anne represented continuity. For decades, she had served as one of the monarchy's most steadfast figures, placing duty above comfort and loyalty above recognition. According to accounts of the meeting, Charles turned to his sister with a level of trust that reflected a lifetime of shared experience. He reportedly spoke about the importance of preserving the values and traditions that had defined their family for generations. Anne understood better than anyone that traditions were not merely ceremonial practices. They were the invisible threads connecting one era to the next. As these responsibilities were quietly acknowledged, the emotional atmosphere continued to intensify. What had begun as a private conversation about legacy was becoming something much more profound. The room was no longer focused on the reign that Charles had built. Instead, attention shifted toward the future he hoped to secure. Every reflection carried an unspoken reminder that some opportunities, once lost, could never be recovered. Every pause seemed filled with meaning, and every person present understood they were witnessing a moment that would remain with them long after the meeting ended. Then came the moment Charles finally revealed the request that changed the entire tone of the meeting. When Charles finally spoke the words he had been holding back, the room reportedly fell silent. It was not a command from a king, nor a constitutional instruction. It was a father's final wish, one rooted in reconciliation, duty, and the survival of a family that had endured years of public division. For a moment, nobody spoke. The conversation that had steadily built toward this point suddenly seemed to stop in its tracks. According to reports from those familiar with royal circles, even the most experienced figure in the room appeared caught off guard by the deeply personal nature of what Charles was about to say. Throughout the meeting, he had reflected on legacy, responsibility, and the future of the monarchy. Yet now he was moving beyond those broader concerns and addressing something far more fragile, something far more human. The future of the crown mattered deeply to him, but the future of his family mattered even more. For years, stories of division had surrounded the House of Windsor. Public disagreements, private disappointments, and relationships strained by distance had created fractures that many believed would never fully heal. Some wounds had become topics of international discussion. Others remained hidden behind palace walls, known only to those directly affected by them. Charles reportedly understood this better than anyone. He had spent decades navigating the complicated realities of family life while carrying the burden of royal duty. Now, faced with the realities of time and circumstance, he appeared determined to confront those issues directly. Sources suggest that Charles spoke about the danger of allowing unresolved conflicts to define future generations. The monarchy had survived political crises, public scandals, and historic upheavals, but family divisions carried a different kind of risk. They lingered, they hardened, they passed from one generation to the next if left unaddressed. According to various interpretations of the meeting, Charles expressed concern that certain fractures within the family had already endured for too long. While specific names may never have been mentioned, everyone present reportedly understood exactly what he was referring to. That realization transformed the atmosphere entirely. What had begun as a discussion about legacy became a conversation about healing. Charles reportedly explained that preserving the institution required more than maintaining traditions and fulfilling public duties. It required preserving the relationships that formed the foundation of the family itself. Without that foundation, even the strongest institution could eventually face challenges from within. It was a perspective shaped not by politics or protocol, but by experience. The king had spent a lifetime witnessing both the strength and the vulnerability of family bonds. As he continued, reports suggest his attention increasingly focused on Prince William. The future king had long been viewed as the figure who would guide the monarchy into its next chapter. Yet Charles's request reportedly had little to do with constitutional responsibilities. Instead, he urged William to prioritize something far more difficult: healing. Not because it would be easy, not because it would erase the past, but because the future demanded it. The weight of those words reportedly settled heavily on William's shoulders. For years, he had carried responsibilities that most people could scarcely imagine. He understood sacrifice. He understood why. He understood what it meant to place the needs of the institution above personal preference. But this request touched a far more complicated part of his life. Family wounds are rarely governed by rules. They do not disappear because circumstances demand it. They linger in memories, disappointments, and moments that cannot simply be undone. According to those familiar with the discussion, William appeared deeply affected as he listened to his father's hopes for the future. Across the room, Princess Anne reportedly remained focused on every word. Few people understood the sacrifices required by royal life better than she did. Throughout decades of service, She had witnessed periods of unity and periods of conflict. She had watched family members come together during moments of triumph and struggle during moments of crisis. As Charles outlined his hopes, Anne reportedly listened with the understanding of someone who knew exactly how much was at stake. This was not merely a conversation about reconciliation. It was a conversation about preserving something larger than any individual disagreement. Gradually, emotions that had remained carefully controlled throughout the meeting began to surface. The significance of the moment became impossible to ignore. Reports suggest that Charles spoke not with the authority of a monarch, but with the sincerity of a father concerned about what he might leave unfinished. The distinction mattered. For decades, his public role had often overshadowed his personal struggles. Yet now, those personal concerns stood at the center of the discussion. What made the request so powerful was its simplicity. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic demands. Just a deeply personal hope that the family he loved could eventually find its way back toward greater understanding. It was a wish rooted in years of experience, years of regret, and years of reflection. Those present reportedly understood that immediately. This was not about rewriting history. It was about preventing old divisions from shaping the future. And as the room absorbed the full meaning of Charles's words, it became increasingly clear that accepting the request would be far easier than carrying it out. The emotions were real, the intentions were sincere, but the challenges standing in the way had been building for years, which was why, as the conversation moved forward, one difficult reality began to emerge above all others. For William, however, fulfilling that wish would prove far more difficult than simply accepting it. Prince William had spent years balancing personal disappointment with public duty. Now, according to various interpretations of the meeting, he faced a challenge unlike any before honoring his father's final wish while carrying the responsibilities of the future king. The words lingered in the air long after King Charles finished speaking. Nobody rushed to answer. Nobody attempted to break the silence. According to reports from those familiar with the atmosphere surrounding the meeting, the significance of the king's request seemed to settle over the room with extraordinary force. Charles had not asked for political assurances. He had not spoken about constitutional responsibilities or royal strategy. Instead, he had placed something far more complicated before his eldest son. He had asked him to think beyond old wounds, beyond disappointment, beyond the conflicts that had shaped some of the most difficult chapters in recent royal history. For Prince William, that request reportedly carried an emotional weight unlike anything he had anticipated. Over the years, he had become known for his discipline, composure, and unwavering commitment to duty. Publicly, he had navigated challenges with remarkable restraint. Privately, however, the story was far more complex. Family relationships are rarely simple, and the pressures of royal life often magnify every disagreement. According to various accounts, William had spent years trying to balance personal feelings with public responsibilities. He understood the importance of stability. He understood the expectations placed upon him. Yet understanding those obligations and living with their consequences were two very different things. As Charles spoke about healing divisions and preserving family unity, reports suggest William found himself reflecting on years of strain that had left lasting marks on the family. Moments that once seemed temporary had gradually evolved into deeper fractures. Misunderstandings had become distances. Distances had become barriers. And barriers, left untouched for long enough, often begin to feel permanent. The future king reportedly understood this reality better than most. He had witnessed how quickly relationships could change and how difficult they could be to rebuild once trust had been damaged. Yet Charles's message was not focused on the past. It was focused on the future. According to sources familiar with the discussion, that King urged William to think beyond present conflicts and consider the legacy those conflicts might leave behind. Time, Charles reportedly suggested, has a way of transforming today's disagreements into tomorrow's regrets. It was not a criticism. It was not an instruction. It was a father sharing a lesson learned through decades of experience, a lesson forged through triumphs, disappointments, and countless moments of reflection. That perspective reportedly struck William deeply, because beneath the responsibilities of the heir to the throne was a son listening to his father confront the realities of age, legacy, and mortality. The future king had always understood that one day the crown would become his responsibility. But in that moment, the reality felt closer than ever before. The burden he had spent years preparing for suddenly seemed more personal, more immediate, and far more emotional than any constitutional duty. As the discussion continued, reports suggest that memories of Queen Elizabeth II began to surface in the minds of those present. Her influence remained impossible to ignore. For decades, she had represented stability in uncertain times. She had endured crises that threatened the institution and challenges that tested the resilience of the family itself. Through it all, she remained guided by principles that valued duty, service, and continuity above personal grievances. According to various interpretations, Charles's request carried echoes of those same values. It was not difficult to imagine the late Queen encouraging reconciliation over resentment and unity over division. For William, however, embracing those ideals reportedly required confronting difficult emotions. Those familiar with the meeting suggest that he struggled to respond immediately, not because he disagreed with his father's hopes, but because he understood the complexity of what was being asked. Some responsibilities can be fulfilled through determination alone, others require company. Confronting pain that has never fully disappeared. Healing old wounds is rarely a straightforward process. It demands patience, humility, and a willingness to revisit memories that many would rather leave untouched. As the silence stretched on, the emotional tension inside the room reportedly reached its highest point. Charles had shared his deepest concern. William was grappling with its implications. And everyone present appeared to understand that this was no longer a discussion about royal responsibilities. It had become a deeply personal reckoning with the future. Duty and emotion, obligation and experience, expectation and reality were all colliding at once. What made the moment so powerful was the contrast at its center. William had spent much of his life preparing to become king. He had trained himself to make difficult decisions, to remain composed under pressure, and to place the institution above himself whenever necessary. Yet now he faced a challenge that could not be solved through protocol or preparation. This was a test of character, compassion, and emotional courage. And according to reports, that realization affected him profoundly. The room reportedly remained quiet as William considered the magnitude of his father's wish. The future king understood that accepting the request was one thing. Living it would be something entirely different. The path ahead was uncertain. The emotions involved were real, and the responsibility now resting on his shoulders felt heavier than ever before. Yet if William's reaction was heartbreaking, Princess Anne's response left the room even more moved. Princess Anne has long been regarded as the monarchy's most disciplined and resilient figure, but insiders whisper that even she found it difficult to remain unaffected as her brother reflected on the future of the institution they had spent their lives protecting. If Prince William's silence revealed the burden of the future, Princess Anne's reaction revealed the weight of if the past. For decades, she had been the steady force within the royal family, the figure who never sought attention yet somehow became indispensable to the institution. While others attracted headlines, Anne built her reputation through relentless service, unwavering commitment, and a determination that seemed almost unbreakable. She had spent a lifetime placing duty above comfort, responsibility above recognition, and loyalty above personal ambition. Yet according to reports from those familiar with the private meeting, even that remarkable resilience was tested as Charles continued speaking. The bond between Charles and Anne was unlike any other within the family. They had shared experiences few people could ever understand. Together they had grown up beneath extraordinary expectations. Together they had witnessed moments of triumph, periods of uncertainty, and profound personal loss. Most importantly, they had spent decades carrying forward the values instilled in them by their parents, particularly by Queen Elizabeth II. Those shared memories reportedly became impossible to ignore as the discussion turned toward legacy in the future. According to various accounts, Charles began reflecting not only on his own journey, but on the extraordinary example set by their late mother. Queen Elizabeth had represented consistency during times of dramatic change. She had guided the monarchy through decades of transformation while remaining firmly committed to service. Her influence shaped every member of the family, but perhaps none more deeply than Anne. Throughout her life, Anne had mirrored many of her mother's qualities. The same determination, the same sense of responsibility, the same belief that duty was not something to be celebrated but something to be fulfilled. As Charles spoke about the legacy left behind by Queen Elizabeth, reports suggest the atmosphere inside the room became increasingly emotional. This was no longer a discussion about future plans or instruction. Institutional stability. It had become a reflection on a lifetime of shared experiences. Memories resurfaced. Lessons learned over decades took on new meaning. Those present reportedly sensed that Charles was looking back not only at the monarchy's history but at the people who had helped preserve it. It was during this part of the conversation, according to insiders, that Charles reportedly turned his attention directly toward Anne. What followed would leave a lasting impression on everyone in the room. For years, Anne had served without demanding praise. She had carried out countless engagements, represented the crown across the world, and remained a pillar of stability during some of the family's most difficult moments. Yet public recognition had rarely been her priority. Duty itself had always been enough. Charles reportedly acknowledged that sacrifice in deeply personal terms. He spoke about loyalty. He spoke about dedication. Most importantly, he spoke about gratitude. Sources suggest. The thanked Anne for standing beside him through challenges that many people would never fully understand. Through public scrutiny, private struggles, and the enormous responsibilities that accompanied royal life, she had remained a constant presence, not because she was required to, because she chose to be. That moment reportedly affected Anne more than anyone expected. For much of her life, Anne had cultivated an image of remarkable composure. She rarely revealed personal emotions publicly. Difficult circumstances were met with determination. Setbacks were met with perseverance. Yet according to those familiar with the meeting, something shifted as Charles expressed his appreciation. Perhaps it was the sincerity of his words. Perhaps it was the realization of how much time had passed. Or perhaps it was the recognition that some conversations carry a significance that cannot be postponed forever. Reports suggest Anne became visibly emotional, not dramatically, not in a way that drew attention to herself, but enough for those present to recognize the depth of the moment. For a brief period, the titles disappeared. The protocols faded. The institution itself seemed to retreat into the background. What remained was a brother expressing gratitude to a sister who had stood beside him for a lifetime. The emotional impact reportedly spread throughout the room. Family members witnessed something they rarely saw: a moment of vulnerability from one of the strongest figures in the monarchy. William, already carrying the weight of his father's request, reportedly watched as the conversation took on an even deeper significance. This was no longer simply about the future. It was about relationships, loyalty, and the enduring bonds that had survived decades of triumphs and hardships. As the discussion continued, the atmosphere became increasingly personal. The focus shifted away from public responsibilities and toward the connections that had defined their lives. Every reflection seemed to carry greater meaning. Every memory appeared more precious. Those present reportedly understood they were witnessing a moment that would remain etched in their minds forever. The meeting had begun as a conversation about legacy, but it had evolved into something far more profound: a final opportunity to acknowledge sacrifices, express gratitude, and strengthen bonds that time itself could never erase. And just when it seemed that the emotional weight of the discussion could not grow any heavier, Charles prepared to share the final thought he wanted his family to remember long after the meeting was over. As the meeting drew to a close, Charles delivered one final message that would stay with them forever. The king's final message was surprisingly simple. It was not about Buckingham Palace, Balmoral, Sandringham, or constitutional authority. Instead, it focused on the values he believed should survive long after any individual monarch was gone. By this point, the meeting had already become far more emotional than anyone had anticipated. Difficult truths had been acknowledged. Personal reflections had been shared. Years of unspoken feelings had quietly surfaced. Yet according to reports from those familiar with the gathering, King Charles believed there was still one final point that needed to be made. It was not a warning. It was not an instruction. It was, in many ways, the conclusion to everything he had been trying to express throughout the conversation. As the room settled into silence once more, Charles reportedly turned his attention away from the immediate challenges facing the family and towards something much larger. Throughout history, monarchs had come and gone. Generations had risen, served, and eventually passed their responsibilities to those who followed. The palaces remained. The ceremonies continued. The institution endured. Yet Charles reportedly suggested that none of those things represented the true heart of the monarchy. Buildings could be preserved. Traditions could be maintained. Titles could be inherited. But values had to be deliberately protected. According to various accounts, Charles spoke about service. Not as an obligation imposed by duty, but as a responsibility freely embraced. It was a principle that had defined the lives of those who came before him. It had guided Queen Elizabeth II through decades of extraordinary change. It had shaped the choices of family members who dedicated themselves to public life, despite the sacrifices required. And now, Charles reportedly believed it was the responsibility of the next generation to carry that principle forward. The conversation reportedly shifted toward responsibility in its broadest sense. Not simply responsibility to the crown, but responsibility to each other. Charles appeared convinced that the future strength of the monarchy would depend on more than successful public engagements or constitutional stability. It would depend on whether the family remained united enough to support the institution together. According to insiders, he stressed that unity was not merely desirable, it was essential. Without it, even the strongest traditions could eventually weaken. William and Anne reportedly listened without interruption. By this stage, there was little left to say. The significance of the moment had become undeniable. Every reflection from Charles seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime's experience. The lessons he shared were not drawn from theory. They had been shaped by decades spent navigating triumph, disappointment, public scrutiny, and personal hardship. Those present reportedly sensed that he was speaking not only as a king reflecting on his reign, but as a man determined to leave behind something meaningful. As the discussion continued, attention gradually turned toward the future generations of the royal family. According to reports, Charles's thoughts moved beyond the people seated in the room and toward those who would eventually inherit the responsibilities being discussed. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, Prince Louis, the children who represented the monarchy's future, the young royals who would one day look back on this era and draw lessons from the decisions being made today. That realization reportedly gave the conversation an entirely new dimension. The challenges of the present suddenly seemed connected to consequences that might extend decades into the future. Every decision, every relationship, and every act of leadership would ultimately shape the environment inherited by the next generation. Charles reportedly emphasized that legacy was not measured by monuments, titles, or public acclaim. True legacy was measured by what endured after a person was gone. The values they protected, the example they set, the unity they inspired. For William, the message carried particular significance. As the future king, he would eventually become the central figure responsible for guiding the institution forward. Yet Charles's reflections suggested that leadership involved more than preserving traditions. It required protecting the principles that gave those traditions meaning. According to sources familiar with the meeting, William appeared deeply aware of that responsibility as he listened. Anne reportedly understood it as well. Throughout her life, she had witnessed how quickly circumstances could change. She had seen periods of remarkable stability and moments of profound uncertainty. More than most, she understood that institutions survive because individuals choose to protect them. And according to reports, Charles's final reflections reinforced that belief. By now, the atmosphere inside the room had become almost entirely personal. Discussions of protocol, hierarchy, and royal responsibilities had faded into the background. What remained was a conversation about character, values, and the enduring importance of family. Charles reportedly wanted those present to remember that the monarch's greatest strength had never been its buildings, ceremonies, or traditions alone. Its greatest strength had always been the people willing to dedicate themselves to something larger than themselves. As his final message drew to a close, those present reportedly understood they had witnessed something extraordinary. Not because of its political significance, but because of its emotional honesty. The king had shared what mattered most to him. He had spoken about service, responsibility, unity, and legacy. Most importantly, he had entrusted those values to the people who would carry them forward. But once the meeting ended, the emotional impact continued to ripple throughout the royal household. In the days that followed, palace corridors reportedly felt different. Staff members noticed a change in mood, while senior figures quietly reflected on the significance of what had taken place behind closed doors. Although no official announcement was made, and no public statement hinted at the deeply personal discussion that had unfolded, those closest to the royal household reportedly sensed that something had changed. The meeting was over, yet its emotional impact remained. The words spoken inside that private room did not simply disappear once the doors closed. Instead, they lingered in conversations, reflections, and quiet moments of contemplation. According to palace insiders, a noticeable sense of solemnity settled over the household in the days that followed. It was not panic. It was not uncertainty. It was something more profound, a growing awareness that a significant chapter in the royal family's story was gradually unfolding. Reports suggest that family members processed the conversation in very different ways. Some reflected privately. Others immersed themselves in their responsibilities. Yet regardless of how they chose to respond, the emotional weight of Charles's message reportedly remained impossible to ignore. His reflections on unity, service, and legacy have touched something deeper than royal duty. They had forced those closest to him to confront difficult questions about the future and their place within it. For Prince William, the days following the meeting reportedly became a period of quiet reflection. According to various accounts, he spent more time focusing on the people closest to him. The responsibilities awaiting him had not changed. The expectations surrounding his future role remained exactly the same. Yet Charles's words appeared to have reframed how he viewed those responsibilities. The future king had always understood the importance of protecting the institution. Now, however, he reportedly found himself thinking more deeply about the family that stood behind it. Sources familiar with royal circles suggest that moments spent with Catherine and their children took on greater significance during this period. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis represented more than the next generation of royals. They entered the future Charles had spoken about so passionately. The future that would one day inherit not only titles and responsibilities, but also the consequences of decisions made today. According to insiders, that realization remained firmly in William's mind as he reflected on the conversation. Princess Anne, meanwhile, reportedly responded in the only way she knew how: through service. Public duties continued. Engagements remained on schedule. Commitments were fulfilled with the same discipline that had defined her entire life. Yet those who observed her closely reportedly sensed a quiet emotional weight beneath her usual composure. Anne had spent decades standing beside her brother, sharing responsibilities that few people could fully understand. The meeting had reminded her of just how much time had passed, and how much history they had experienced together. According to reports, Charles's words also began influencing discussions taking place behind the scenes. Not through dramatic decisions or sudden changes, but through subtle shifts in perspective. Senior advisors reportedly recognized that the conversation carried significance beyond the immediate family. The themes Charles had emphasized: continuity, unity, responsibility, and legacy, were principles that would inevitably shape future planning. Those responsible for helping guide the institution understood that they were witnessing more than a personal moment. They were witnessing the transmission of values from one generation to the next. Within palace circles, insiders reportedly described the atmosphere as thoughtful and reflective. Staff members continued their work as normal, yet many sensed that senior figures were quietly considering what the future might hold. The monarchy has always existed within a unique relationship with time. It must focus on the present while constantly preparing for decades ahead. Charles's message had reportedly reinforced that reality. The future was no longer an abstract concept. It had become a subject of immediate reflection. As days turned into weeks, the emotional impact of the meeting showed no sign of fading. Instead, it appeared to deepen. Family members reportedly revisited the conversation in their minds. Advisors considered its implications. The values Charles had emphasized continued to resonate far beyond the room in which they had been spoken. According to those familiar with the royal household, there was a growing recognition that the meeting would eventually be remembered as one of those rare moments that quietly shaped the course of future events. What made the aftermath so remarkable was not any dramatic action or public development. It was the contrast between silence and significance. Nothing outwardly appeared different, yet beneath the surface, perspectives were shifting. Priorities were being reconsidered. Relationships were being viewed through a new lens. The monarchy was, in its own quiet way, preparing for the future Charles had spoken about so earnestly. And with every passing day, one truth became increasingly clear. The king's final wish had never been about a single conversation or a single moment. It was about ensuring that the lessons of the past would continue guiding the generations yet to come. And ultimately, the true meaning of Charles's final wish had little to do with the present and everything to do with what comes next. Long after the meeting ended, and the doors closed behind them, one question remained. Would Charles's final wish endure? For William and Anne, the answer would define not only their relationship with family, but also the future direction of the monarchy itself. The days following that extraordinary conversation passed quietly, but the questions raised inside that room refused to fade. According to those familiar with royal circles, neither Prince William nor Princess Anne could easily move on from what they had heard. King Charles had not simply shared a personal reflection. He had entrusted them with something far more significant. He had asked them to protect a vision of the future built not upon power, prestige, or public perception, but upon unity, responsibility, and enduring service. The challenge now was determining whether that vision could survive in a world where family relationships often proved far more complicated than royal traditions. For William, the request reportedly remained at the forefront of his thoughts. The future king understood better than anyone that every generation of the monarchy eventually faces defining choices. Some decisions shape public history, others shape private legacies. Yet the most important choices often influence both. Charles's words had forced him to consider a difficult reality. The future of the crown could not be separated from the future of the family. The two were intertwined. Every relationship strengthened the institution or weakened it. Every effort toward understanding carried consequences far beyond the individuals involved. Reports suggest that William increasingly reflected on what kind of monarchy he hoped to leave behind for his own children. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis would one day inherit responsibilities that few could fully comprehend. Yet Charles's message had emphasized something deeper than responsibility alone. Future generations would inherit values. They would inherit examples. They would inherit lessons shaped by the choices being made today. According to insiders, this realization became one of the most powerful aspects of the king's final request. Princess Anne reportedly viewed the situation through a similar lens. Throughout her life, she had witnessed the consequences of both unity and division. She understood how quickly trust could be damaged and how difficult it could be to restore once broken. More importantly, she understood that institutions survive because individuals make sacrifices for something greater than themselves. According to A.C. Counts from those familiar with the aftermath of the meeting, Anne believed Charles's message reflected a principle that had guided the monarchy through generations of challenge and change. The influence of Queen Elizabeth II reportedly remained present throughout these reflections. Though she was no longer there to offer guidance directly, her example continued to shape the thinking of those who had served alongside her. For William and Anne, her legacy was never simply about longevity or duty. It was about consistency, stability, commitment, the belief that service mattered more than personal grievances. According to various interpretations, Charles's final wish carried echoes of the same philosophy that had defined much of his mother's reign. As time passed, another realization gradually emerged. Charles's legacy would not ultimately be measured by ceremonies, state occasions, or constitutional achievements. Those things would always form part of history, but they were not the center. The theme of the message he had chosen to leave behind. His legacy, according to those closest to the situation, was increasingly being framed through values rather than authority, through character rather than position, through the relationships he hoped could endure long after titles and responsibilities passed to the next generation. That perspective transformed the meaning of the entire story. What began as a private conversation had evolved into something much larger. It became a reflection on reconciliation, a meditation on duty, a reminder that service requires sacrifice and that leadership often demands difficult choices. The meeting was never truly about looking backward. It was about preparing for what lay ahead, and perhaps that is why Charles's final wish resonated so deeply. It offered no guarantees. It provided no easy solutions. Instead, it placed responsibility in the hands of those who would shape the future. William and Anne understood that better than anyone. The road ahead would not always be simple. Challenges would arise, relationships would be tested, difficult decisions would still need to be made. Yet beneath all those uncertainties remained a sense of hope that understanding could prevail over division, hope that service could triumph over self-interest, hope that future generations would inherit not only a monarchy, but the values necessary to preserve it. In the end, the conversation left behind something more powerful than instructions or expectations. It left behind a shared responsibility, a reminder that every generation must choose what kind of legacy it wishes to pass forward. And for William, Anne, and those who will follow them, that responsibility now forms part of the story they are still writing. Because in the end, the greatest inheritance a king can leave behind is not a crown but a promise. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.